Hi, I'm Jennifer Trellick, and my company is Maker Kids. We run robotics, coding, and Minecraft programs for kids, so camps, after-school programs, and birthday parties. Some of our graduates have gone on to start businesses, be featured with their projects on national TV, and be teaching programs at their schools as well.
Great, thanks. And beside her is Hina Mia, is that correct? And you are from?
I'm from Girls Press Code, which is a group of girls in Regent Park who are learning how to code. There are terrific boys as well. So I need to. So basically what a group is, we empower girls. As you can see, they're really low represented in tech industries, and it gets more like more important if you look at like the colors. There's not enough colored girls in technology, and we empower girls, and of course everyone else, but mainly girls, to like get out there and show.
Terrific. So Girls Crack the Code, what a great name. And beside her is Zina.
Yes, so this is my home turf right here at Regent Park Focus. I am a student reporter here, and great to be having resources available to the community who want to learn media training and have access to live production studio stuff.
That's terrific. And you are Carol Wilkins?
Yeah, that's me.
And you're from?
Camp Tech.
You actually look at the camera. You
Yeah,
don't look at me.
So Camp Tech, and we run tech workshops for non-technical people, specifically adults. And so we run in-person 3-hour or 6-hour workshops intro to podcasting. So you learn how to make a podcast in one day from scratch. And Photoshop, Illustrator, make your own website. And so we teach people how to do it themselves so they don't have to go to a gatekeeper that knows all of the technology. So we kind of demystify the web for them.
It's going to tie in nicely. We'll get to our topic soon. And our last dialed in here, it's Thierry Blanc, is that correct? From Media Smarts. So if you could tell us something about what you do and why you do it, perhaps.
Yeah, so my name is Thierry Plante. I'm the media education specialist here at Media Smart. We're the co-founders and organizers of the Media Literacy Week. Media Smart is a non-profit organization. We're a national resource center for parents, for teachers, and for librarians, for any adult who wants to intervene in a child's life and start having those conversations about media and media literacy and digital literacy with children in their life. And so we create free lesson plans, tip sheets, guides, interactive multimedia resources to help parents, teachers to have those discussions with children.
And I'm Ian Esquivel. I'm a media educator in Toronto, and I'm affiliated with the board of Regent Park Focus Youth Media Arts Center. I'm very happy to be here today. I have used Media Smarts a lot. You can see that there's an awful lot of wealth in this panel, and so it's going to be a rich conversation. The topic itself, or the statement itself that we're going to respond to, I'm going to read the statement, and then I'm going to have everybody speak to it and what they think it means briefly for a couple of minutes, and then we'll take it from there in terms of the panel. So the panel discussion focus is, what is the role of media education literacy in the age of the selfie? So we're going to start with that, and I'm going to go down to the end and say, what do you take that to mean, and what's your response?
Well, I see this as a very important topic, especially because nowadays, so many people going on things like YouTube and expressing themselves, and media education is important because in order to get a lot of good following, you need to know things like video editing, how to make a nice title screen for your video, and all kinds of things like that. It just broadens the range of people that you reach. So media education is really important. The more educated you are, the better your content will be, and the more people you'll be able to touch, I guess. So.
Great. We'll just come down the panel if that's okay, if you just want to speak to it.
Sure. So in the age of the selfie, it's really easy to be a consumer and just consume all the technology that comes your way, watching Netflix, that sort of thing. So I think this type of media literacy education is really important because it's teaching people, and in our case kids, to not just let everything flow their way and be sort of consumed by it and lying on their bed, but instead to actually be creators within that movement and to learn how to do things like coding their own website that other people can use, and then gain some sort of personal fulfillment out of knowing that instead of just accessing what's available, they're also able to create things that other people can use.
Alright, so as we know that, well, let me just let out a point. Everyone is a producer in their own way, if they know it or not. For example, you post a photo online, you're kind of displaying what you want to show. So you are producing something in a way. And in the age of selfie is basically this. And we think it's an important thing to not only be consumer and not know that you're producing your own thing, but like go out and know how to create and be part of this big, huge movement that's happening in front of our eyes that we're not that aware of. We should know all the aspects of internet and move along with it as it's going. As you know, technology is moving fast, and we have to keep up.
I'm gonna have to agree with my co-panelists right here. We are consumers, as Jen said, and it's definitely a lot easier to just sit around and watch Netflix, YouTube, go on Instagram, Facebook, and be consumed and all the news and all the information, and we can get bored of it. So media education is really important because the more you learn, the more you can do, the more you can give back, and just produce action, and hopefully make an impact in the world someday with the media education.
Awesome. Yes, I agree with everything. Of course. I also think, Media Smarts is a really important organization because they're also teaching youth to think critically. We all take selfies. I take selfies all the time. And we're using it for self-expression. But we're also, taking in all of these images of, pop stars and things like that. And organizations like Media Smarts, they're, educating us to think critically, to use these platforms for self-expression, but for ourselves, for us to create our work and find our place. And so, I was going to talk about CamTech, we're all about empowering people, but I do think that Media Smarts actually, when we're talking about selfies, talks about really important things in this age, in this digital age.
Is it not a great transition to you?
Yeah.
You're endorsed. So in terms of your response to this statement, what's the role of media education and literacy in the age of selfie? What do you take that to mean, and what's your response to that?
It's my turn now. Media literacy and digital literacy is at the core of what Media Smarts does. So I had prepared quite the little story to really kind of explain it and contextualize where this approach to media education came from, what it's grounded on. I'm not too sure how much time I want to take here. Just briefly, the Media Smarts came out in the mid-90s because parents and teachers at the time, as part of a national survey, wanted to have a resource center so that they could talk to their children about issues with media at the time. So these were more traditional issues, for example, body image, gender representation, marketing and consumerism, violence on television. And so we started creating resources to help parents discuss those issues. But obviously, as digital technology became more and more popular, then we started following the kids through the technologies they were using, and then creating resources to address specific questions that show up with digital technology. However, all the core media literacy principles and questions still apply to digital literacy. So from the beginning of the creation of MediaSmart, we decided to ground everything we did in research. And at first we looked at what was being done in terms of understanding of media and influence of media, all the big texts at the time. So we came up with 5 fundamental principles that ground all the resources that we do, and perhaps I'll get a chance to talk about them later. We also conduct primary research, and all of this to say that that's what informs our position in terms of what is important for children right now in terms of media literacy and digital literacy. Research has shown that any kind of media literacy and digital literacy has to go beyond teaching the technical skills, that especially now in the age of the selfie. And children need not only to develop critical thinking skills about the media they consume, but also to have a whole host of skills and competencies that we've recently kind of organized in a digital literacy framework. And again, maybe I can speak about that a little bit later. But all this to say that for us, the fundamental way to reach children and their needs right now in the age of the selfie is to be able to critically engage with the media they consume, but also with the media they produce.
So maybe on that topic, that is a question we should consider. What is important to kids right now in terms of their digital lives?
So,
Can you hear me? What is important? You mentioned what's important to kids right now. What do you think is important? What are you hearing from them?
well, so we cover a whole range of issues, and that'll kind of give you an idea of what topics are important. I mentioned the classic media literacy questions, those of violence in the media, body image, and representation. In the age of the selfie, those don't go away. One of the principles, for example, one of the fundamental principles in media literacy is an understanding that media are construction. And imagine if children were able to, whenever they encounter a selfie or even make a selfie, come from that particular lens and understanding that when they see somebody else's selfie, for example, it's been carefully constructed. It essentially transmits codes and norms that are worth looking into. I'm thinking especially for girls. There are definitely some questions to be asked as to what are the norms from a very local level, maybe around in their group of friends. What are you allowed to do and not to do in a selfie? How are you allowed to appear and not appear? And then go beyond that to maybe just as our North American society as a role, understanding what kind of norms there may be there in terms of how you have to look in a selfie or what's expected for you to do in a selfie. So and again, to give you perhaps another example of the considerations we find are important, the host of skills and competencies that we identify as being very important in the age of digital media, we've separated in 7 categories: ethics and empathy. And a good example of that is to think of sexting, for example, where a lot of harm in sexting occurs when it's shared. So it's not just a question of a legal issue, but when somebody receives, let's say, a sext that wasn't intended for them, now suddenly we're talking about a moral and ethical question and questioning that needs to occur in children. We have a category for privacy and security, a category for community engagement, and I think some of the other panelists are starting to talk about that, the idea of empowering children to have their voices heard, to essentially get them to think about their rights as citizens. We have a category for digital health, which includes anything from excessive use of media to body image to recognizing what a healthy relationship looks like online. consumer awareness, understanding that much of the internet happens in commercial spaces, finding and verifying skills, and then finally, and which is the theme of the week this week, is the whole idea of making and remixing. And again, what this offers in terms of self-expression, in terms of collaboration, in terms of 21st century work skills. So all of these together make for a lot of skills and competencies that children should be exposed to early, often, and through essentially all parts of their lives. So at home, at school, and in any other activity where they use digital media.
Great, thanks. I know it is a comprehensive, we use a lot of that in education. I'm going to pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned here and throw this out to the panel. There was chuckling when you were talking about some of the norms, so maybe we'll start with that idea about what some of those things are. My experience as an educator is that kids are they'll be critical thinkers when they're analyzing something, they can see the sex role stereotyping and that, but when they go to produce, they replicate a lot of those things. So kind of interesting to me, this idea of codes and norms, and how somebody who's critical of images of, for example, young women who are doing things to make themselves appear attractive, are very critical of that, but then the selfie they make they're very worried about that. I want to look right because I know that there's a boy that I'm interested in or something like that. So maybe I'll throw it out to the panel and we can talk a bit about that. Do you want to start?
Yeah.
Great.
So at Camp Tech, we have this lovely woman, Vivian McMaster, in Vancouver, and she has, she's reclaimed her self-love through selfies. And so we have a smartphone photography class in Vancouver where that's what she teaches. Because as adults, we still deal with those issues. It's not just youth. Like, we're still crafting our images and thinking about those things. And when we're looking at images, we can, scroll on Instagram, you get caught in that zone. And so in her class, she teaches how to, take your selfie and just be happy with it. And not take 40 and 50 and 60 to try and craft that perfect image of someone you're not. And love yourself as you are, and use, taking a selfie with your smartphone as a tool to rediscover yourself. And so, we still deal with that as adults, and so I think that's ongoing. It's an ongoing learning. Yeah.
Someone else want to jump in on that?
I wanna, as much as self-love comes from a selfie, what I also find what happens the most, and it's like, no insult to anybody, but some people will, as adults, still be concerned with their looks, where with Instagram, you can filter, you can alter your image, and with Photoshop, a lot of Photoshop classes are accessible now. People are using it to their advantage. A lot of entrepreneurs come from selfies and Instagram and all of that, which is great. Another thing that, kind of a con to the age of selfie is that you can become unrecognizable from your photos. Not to say that it shouldn't scare anybody off. It's just these skills and these filters, they're coming on, and I think that's why media education is important in it too. And as he mentioned, media smarts mentioned, there's empathy. So you should use it as an expression of self-love, not to create like a virtual appearance of your highlight reel.
So I'm going to actually go down to the question about game design because it's often been criticized. It's a sort of heterosexual, male-dominated, and some of the imagery is quite problematic. So what's your response in terms of gender norms or any kind of norms and production versus consumption?
Well, yeah, in video games, that's definitely a huge issue. It's a male-dominated field, not only the people that produce it, but the people that consume it as well. And I find that a lot of developers, being male, and concept artists and stuff like that, they will create like these very exaggerated, over-sexualized female representation of the characters and stuff like that. And it's a distorted image, and I think it's actually very damaging to society to see that kind of thing, and just plays into the whole creating this false self, this false identity what women should appear like, and then you also on the other side you have the masculine, like the men are very like big. If you look at a lot of male characters in video games, they all pretty much almost all look the same. Like they're like the 6 foot tall, like dark haired, dark eyed guy with muscles and stuff like that. And it's damaging because people try to live up to these standards, and it doesn't help that in the video game industry that occurs. There are a lot of like smaller independent studios that look at making more realistic looking characters, especially like characters that are of other races and stuff like that. So that's another problem that we have in video games is like the lead character is always this white guy, the heroine is always a white woman, but other games are now starting to explore looking at other races and making them the heroes and heroines of video games. So
where do you think that's coming from? Why are people doing that? Why is there a shift?
I think people are starting to recognize that that's an issue, that's a problem. Like I said, like the lead character of a game always looks like the exact same in every game, and people are starting to take notice of that. So when somebody actually thinks out of the box and makes a character that's of another ethnicity, people really respond to that because it's real. People crave realism. People are kind of like sick of all these like fake like selfies and the fakery. People want to be genuine. There's that definite need to be real and genuine.
I think that's an important distinction when we're talking about the selfie as well. There are those for whom it isn't about creating an image necessarily. It's still a construction, but it's just about capturing that joy or whatever is going on with them.
Can I add one thing
Sure.
about the games?
Sure.
So there's an organization in Toronto called Dames Making Games.
Yeah.
Amazing. You probably already know of them. And they are, women, trans, LGBT. There's all these kinds of like amazing people doing awesome games. They're creating awesome games and they're representing themselves. And so I found out about that organization like earlier this year.
If I can make also a comment about the games.
Yeah.
Specifically addressing that issue, I created last year a resource here to get younger children, to think about those stereotypes in video games and who is being represented in video games. So, for example, even in terms of character selection, when you go to create your own character, up until recently, whenever you wanted to create your own character, your choices were very often for men, as my fellow panelists mentioned. You had the choice between essentially a dark-haired, muscular guy and maybe a blonde-haired, muscular guy. You didn't have a lot of options, and typically your character would have to be Caucasian. For the women, or for the female character, again, it would be typically skinny, typically Caucasian, long hair, and so on. And again, we don't necessarily see a lot of diversity even in what are supposed to be customizable choices that we have when we create a video game. And this essentially goes back to an old story, which is the whole idea of representation in the media and who's telling everybody else's story. So we're doing better on television, for example, in other media in terms of representation in front of the screen. And so I'm very glad to hear about the group that was just mentioned of game designers, because we also need to start thinking about who's behind the screen and behind the media, and that's part of what we're hoping to highlight in the whole idea of makers and creators.
So on the topic of makers, that's maybe we want to hear from Jennifer about this, who's a CEO of Maker Kits, obviously involved in these kinds of production pieces, but critical thinking pieces as well. So what's your take on this in terms of how you work with kids at Maker Kits?
Sure. So at Maker Kits, we attract kids. Usually they're interested in learning the technologies that we teach, like I mentioned, robotics, coding, and Minecraft. But what we're really doing, in addition to teaching them the technical skills, is also teaching them soft skills and 21st century learning skills, such as leadership, creativity, and confidence. Excuse me. So, for example, we teach kids to create video games using coding, and we invite them to create games that do good for the world, or games that might add value to someone's life. So instead of creating violent games, they create games that are fun or educational and that sort of thing. And then in our Minecraft program, we use the huge interest in Minecraft that kids have to get them interested in other things such as electronics, coding, graphic design, 3D design, and a lot of parents send their kids to our Minecraft program actually to socialize them. So it's a great way for them to be doing their favorite game, but also talking to all the kids next to them. And in that class in particular, we actually teach kids nonviolent communication. So instead of, let's say someone accidentally destroys their creation in Minecraft, we highlight an example where instead of saying, hey, you ruined my thing, blah, 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 we model communication that's something along the lines of, oh, I noticed that you entered into an area where I'm building. I'm sure you didn't mean to. I'm going to move over there so that we both have our own space to build in. And we've seen some great results from kids, actually. We have a number of kids that come that have different mental health diagnoses, and parents have reported reduction in symptoms, as well as children's mental health agencies have started referring kids to us, which is awesome. And then our other program, robotics, allows kids to do things like light up LEDs, make them blink, turn them on and off, makes buzzers play songs. And this is a great program for helping them walk around the world and realize that they can kind of make an impact. So even something as simple as seeing their bedroom light turn on and off, well, now they kind of know how to do that. And there have been kids that have created, for example, there was a 10-year-old that created a system where on the way up to the cottage, he did something on his phone, and then the electric water heater turned on the way there, using a robotic system that he created after taking one of our classes, so that by the time they got to the cottage, the water was all warmed up. So those are some of the types of things that we do at Maker Kids.
And so in terms of that, it seems to sit nicely with the Girls Crack the Code group that's Hina, you're involved in. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do in that program?
So in that program, we try to we teach girls to code, of course, in various ways, not only to code but to create with technology. We have also done many things with LEDs. We are engaged with many other corporations. We take our girls to Google to teach them about how technology is in companies and how. And some of the girls have gone to Salesforce camp, which is called Girl Force, which shows that girls are really underrepresented in these companies. We have gone to Google to show girls how it is. Some of our girls have done technology camps such as Girls Learning Code and Zero to Startup, which teaches them about all about creating technology, creating not only be consumers but of course be producers in their own way. So we're really a wide range of things we do. Anything involved with technology, we send our girls to learn as much as they can.
You were very nice down there, Jennifer, talking about when kids are responding to having done something in Minecraft. But I was tutoring a young man 2 years ago, he was in grade 6, and part of his issue around English was that he was just staying up all night playing Minecraft, really. He was very honest with me about it. And then he kind of showed me what he was doing, and I think there's lots of positive things about Minecraft. However, I was appalled by the language of the kids who he was online with. It wasn't nice, and it seemed like there's a lot of bullying going on, a lot of language that in grade 6 I was somewhat shocked, and I'm a teacher. You alluded to the notion of mental health, and I think that that's another piece we need to consider here, because we know that these technologies and that the time spent with various media forms do have an impact on kids' mental health. So maybe we could get you to comment on that, because I know the Media Smarts have spent a lot of time around these issues.
Yes, one of the things that we do talk about a lot in our research and in our resources is this whole idea of getting children to essentially getting a better idea of what is the norm and what isn't. Part of a lot of the harm, let's say we were discussing selfies earlier, is this idea of whenever you're consuming media and you don't question it, it's very easy to start developing this ideas of what is normal, especially what is normal behavior. And but part of media education is to essentially help critical thinking towards minimizing that effect that media can have.
So, in terms of, I heard you were going on, agreeing with something there. What were you putting on?
Yeah, and so someone that I know is really into gaming, and I've seen that. He goes on an app called Twitch, where you live stream. You're aware of this. And so I've heard the same thing. And I was also very like, wow. I think it's more the norm than not. That that's how men, that it usually is men playing the game, and it's like shooter games where it's like, aliens who have like giant muscles. They're talking to each other like this. They're swearing at each other, and I feel like it's more the norm than not. And so I think the importance of this week is educating people on other resources that are out there. And I think it's important what he's saying is, thinking a little bit more critically and being aware that if you are not, if you haven't had any second thoughts about the way that you're, talking to your other friends or things like that, that could be a flag, maybe. And so I think just even having the conversation and just kind of putting it out there is really good, just for people to think about and be aware.
And also, just a little comment, but also just realizing in that context that you, even if you are young, have the power to establish new social norms within whatever environment you're in. That you can actually challenge them and try to create new ones if you'd rather see that.
So, part of the reason I know so much about these sites and that is just because my students come and show me, and often they're appalled by what they encounter, which is interesting to me. So, and you mentioned the idea of this desire to do things differently, and I think that young people do want to do things differently, and they do want some moral compass. I think that they, if they're led in that direction, and they see some role modeling about that, then they're quite prepared to, step up. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I find as an educator, especially being in a classroom setting, I encounter that quite a lot. Kids playing those video games and like you were mentioning, like seeing lots of swearing, and I think it's kind of irresponsible as developers to put that kind of content out there. And as an educator, I see that kind of thing, and so like I try to, being conscious of that, try to be a good example. And I think it's important as media educators that we are good examples of that. If we have a classroom setting, not allowing any swearing, not allowing any sort of violent content creation to go on in a classroom setting. And it's just really important. We have a huge responsibility as educators to be good examples to these kids.
One of the real challenges for us I work for the Toronto District School Board, is trying to create inclusion around our LGBTQ plus youth, who often don't appear in a lot of texts that are used. So I wonder if anybody's come across that issue at all.
I would actually like to point out some of the stuff, like by giving out a scenario. Like imagine you're on the internet and you wanted to search something that's important to you. And when you do, and you find out that what you searched up is, like I'm thinking of Muslims, for example, like if you search up something like faith that's important to you, many searches would come out saying you're a terrorist because just of your religion. And I would like to point out that if there were more Muslim women in the tech industry who were producing all of this, do you really think that this would appear more? Because as Google puts up the main, the most searches. So I would like to point that out, and I think it goes for the same as what you just said, for them to.
I think something to mention. You asked what were some of the challenges, especially working with inclusion and everything. Is I think we're all here, educating the younger millennials, essentially on how to behave and react to such things as cyberbullying. And I think what's important also is that to educate parents. You know, here at Regent Park Focus, we did an interview with Health Phone, and parents have a huge role because, you know, they're not into, I'm not into all the games and texts that my little cousins are. You know, they're really absorbed into it, and like you said, cyberbullying, all this kind of language can become a norm, but to the norm where can the kids really be affected by it? You know, are they hurt by it? You can't tell.
Yeah.
You can't tell as, you know, a guardian, as a parent. So I think it's really important for media education to not only be, you know, only for kids, it should be for adults and adults too. Yeah.
And I would think, I'm going to go to Jennifer and ask, I would think Maker Kids really as parents actively engage in wanting their kids to do stuff.
That's right. A lot of parents, what we found is they're actually bringing their kids to us for the kids' first introduction to a computer. So the parents are actually giving that, like, we have an enormous responsibility when that's the case, because we're introducing this tool to them that can be used for good, but can also be used for evil, so to speak. So when we do that, we're teaching them, you know, to make sure that they're not downloading or searching up bad things, that they're not bullying, that they are, you know, always being polite online, that they're not contacting people they shouldn't be contacting, and all sorts of different things like that. As well, with regards to the mental health aspect you were speaking about earlier, just some other small comments. We found that these programs have been really effective for kids with mental health diagnoses such as autism and ADHD for a couple of reasons. One is it's kind of like a high-tech arts therapy for them, where they're able to make something and be recognized for it in a way that they might not have been recognized before. Often people are recognized for being creative in areas like music and arts, but now we're starting to see people recognized for being creative in engineering, website creation, etc. And also, making something helps you feel a bit more power over the world. Like you're making something that's useful to other people. And sometimes when kids are so engaged in something like Minecraft, they're almost a little bit more distracted and willing to take more social risks. So we had some kids who weren't, you know, they weren't talking to adults before they came to our program, aside from their parents. But all of a sudden they got so into Minecraft that they got distracted and reached out to an instructor and said, hey, can you help me download this mod? And it was like an astounding moment. And so they're able to take more risks like that. And I think this sort of education is kind of creating difference. Some parents have said, you know, before he came here, he might have potentially spent his life like on the couch playing video games, like well into adulthood, because that's what they were seeing at home. And now some of these kids are, you know, actually teaching other kids how to create robots or things like that, and could end up being entrepreneurs, employing more people, and having a much greater impact on the economy.
So we often, I like the way you frame the risk there, because often when we think of risk, we think of the risky behaviors, but I have a student who, you know, he posted a image of himself kissing his boyfriend. And I think that that's positive risky behavior, right? But often what we see is a different kind of risky behavior. And maybe I'll ask you to speak to that, because I know you spend a lot of time, the organization spent a lot of time around those other behaviors. I'm sorry, couldn't quite hear me. So in terms of risk management, I know that Media Smarts does a lot of work around kids who are engaging in risky behavior online and also one-to-one. Can you speak to that?
Oh, yes. Part of what we found in our research is that one of the things we need to address is the whole notion of how to define risky behavior. For example, in the case of cyberbullying, in our latest research, what an adult might consider as being cyberbullying was just seen as drama by the child. And so it was difficult to have a conversation going between the adult and the child when they both kind of came from a different perspective on that same issue. The other thing this conversation is making me think about is something that we come across a lot in the research that we see, which is the idea that those kids that are at risk online are typically those that are already at risk offline, and that so, for example, the kids that would perhaps have be more hurt by cyberbullying are often the ones that have actually witnessed actual bullying or intimidation in their real life. And so there was a similar effect for, let's say, kids would have violent behavior after playing violent video games. Again, the kids that had a tendency to be more violent that way were the ones that are actually seen violence in real life. So it's what it comes down to is that parents and adults in the life of children up to a certain age, and after that peers kind of take over, are still the greater influence and on behavior and specifically risk-taking behavior, which then translates into online risk-taking.
Thanks. So I'm going to actually throw this out to, we do have an audience here in front of us. You can see the backs of their heads. And I'm going to throw it out if anybody wants to jump in and make any comments. I know we have a diversity of people here. What's your take on any of the topics so far, or this last piece around risky behaviors, perhaps, in kids' online behaviors? Any sense of that? Adonis, who is the executive director of Untitled Focus. Yes.
Well, Media Smarts mentioned, probably really tough to be Media Smarts actually mentioned community involvement as one of the frameworks that our principles that we work under. And I was just wondering about that because when I think of the age of the selfie, I often think, yeah, we're giving young people in terms of media education and literacy the tools to produce themselves, but often they're producing, really, they're branding themselves.
Yeah.
Like using those tools to brand themselves in terms of, and often modeling themselves after celebrity culture kind of thing. And it's less, I find is less about understanding issues in the world, understanding like being informed as citizens. And you see this whole election, the U.S. election, of course, that's happening, and media beginning to impose themselves as in terms of this fact checker things, and why has that all of a sudden become important, and why in a sense we're not giving the tools to people to understand media or look at media critically, and therefore media now has to impose themselves in a way to do this fact checking because we're used to, as soon as a politician says something, it's authority, or our authority figure says something, it must be true because they wouldn't say anything false. So those kind of issues, I'm just wondering what people's take on that in terms of media education.
Anybody want to jump in on that very one level? See, the Adonis is talking about, and this kind of refers to what I was saying. Sometimes I find my students will replicate dominant discourses, even though they might be able to challenge them in viewing and listening. But when it comes to making stuff, they are often just replicating things that are sometimes very problematic. I have two lovely young nephews that I just saw there in the States, and they're thoughtful, they're feminists, and they do all these wonderful things. These two young men, but when they go to play games or they go to make films, they are somewhat sexist, which I called them on a bit. And it's like, where does that come from? So Adonis has asked some important questions, and especially this notion of our tools, or tools that are available to kind of amend some of those ways of being, right? So any ideas here about those topics?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're talking about is really important. I think it also has to do with community. So where are you? What kind of people are you surrounded by? And often there are limitations to, maybe your family or maybe your friends, and maybe you don't have good influences. I grew up in a government subsidized housing, neighborhood, and I didn't have any good influences. There were drug dealers and things like that. We moved to Oakville, and everything changed. Everything was different. People were very nice, and I was like, are they real? Are they actually just like smiling? And my views started to change. And so that's just like a personal take on it. I think it also has to do with places like, Regent Park TV in this organization that we're in here. I think it's so amazing because people in this community can just walk in and learn something and have an outlet instead of doing something else that maybe they're influenced by. And they can talk to someone like you who will maybe challenge their ideas, and maybe they've never heard that before in their personal circle.
And I think the notion of community that you're alluding to, I think that one good thing for me about media is that people can find that community of people and help redefine. If you can't find community locally that supports your kind of values and beliefs, you can sometimes find that online. Any comments on that? Is your community, or do you feel like you have any online community? I would argue that my students feel really connected to different kinds of online communities. Is that your experience at all?
There are definitely, one of the first communities I ever joined digitally was, it was a Korean pop group. Very, very popular, very supportive. You also, you do see you meet people from all over the world digitally, and can be risky. I kind of just grew up with the TV and the internet, and one thing that you did mention, and I would have to agree with Adonis, is that you kind of just replicate what you know, and if I was younger and I met you, and you kind of challenged my thoughts and everything, I'd be really uncomfortable. I'd be really uncomfortable. I might not even be open to the idea, and it just might be like, just push off. I'm gonna go to where I'm most comfortable.
I'd like to actually add on to in our community Regent Park, how it's all combined. For example, before we never had Daniel Spectrum as one of the places we can go and use the technology. As I'm passionate for technology, I'm in multiple groups that actually sometimes do have something to do with technology. I was in this group, the Hour of Code. That was able to happen because of this facility that we have in Regent Park. And it's really amazing because these schools are doing programs related to technology because they're finding that it's an important topic that should be shared and spread around. There's so many aspects of technology that have so much to say about, gender equality, equality in general, and then how it's evolving, how there's robotics, coding, web design. There's a lot to follow along, and I think community is a really big part.
So resources,
It is.
community resources is important too. Just like Regent Park Focus here, growing up with the TV and wanting to, work in media broadcasting, there was not really a place for me to practice unless I reached out far to North York, to Rogers TV, where I can volunteer. Whereas here, at a community television and radio station, I was able to apply what I knew from school. So it's all about community resources. It goes beyond the bricks and mortars and everything like that. So it's who's around you, who's a good influence, and who can help you bring out the best potential in you.
Yeah, what we've seen at Maker Kids is a lot of students are meeting friends, and some of the time it's actually their first friend that they've made, which is really nice. So I think that's partly because people are attracted to it and they have shared interests, the kids that come. And also sometimes they develop the social skills that enable them to make a friend. For example, making a robotics project and realizing their capabilities can give them more confidence to then reach out to someone and show them how to improve their robotics project. So I think it's kind of amazing the power that technology has to both kind of keep us apart if you think about things like Facebook, but also to bring us together through in-person experiences. Yeah.
So, as a professor at doing game design, do you find, are you a gamer?
It's like, no.
I'm actually I'm really busy. I not only teach at Regent, but I make video games in the studio.
Okay.
So I find when you're a game developer that you have very little time to even play games. So, but I do once in a while, just
Do you
here
have
and
a
there.
community around you that's perhaps not a face-to-face community because of that?
Yeah, definitely. People are playing games on their own and they're connecting to each other online and stuff like that instead of face-to-face contact and all that. Yeah, for sure.
To come back to the Regent Park Focus, one of my first experiences when we're talking about representation in communities online is there's a, if you were to look in lots of different kinds of media, for years the representation of Regent Park was pretty negative. And some of the first things that I saw were things that came out of Regent Park Focus. And they were challenging that discourse, that way of seeing Regent Park by posting other things. And so I'm thinking of that video where they talked about, going into rich communities and saying, are they a ghetto? And I think that was a really clever way. So you create, through one community that's online or in media forums, you create a whole other community that questions that. Media Smarts has done a remarkable job of creating a kind of community of people across the country. Do you want to speak to that? Yeah, because you really reached right across Canada.
Absolutely, across Canada, internationally. I'm very happy to see that this year, for the second year in a row, the United States decided to host their very own Media Education Week as well. So our equivalent organization in the States, Common Sense Media, is now hosting the same kind of week, different topic, but absolutely inspired by us. This week as well, and it's a coincidence, but it's a happy coincidence, UNESCO is having a week on its global media education initiative. So it's definitely, this is the 11th annual Media Literacy Week. And from the beginning, the whole idea was to try to bring people together who are interested in media literacy and media education, digital literacy, because at first, 11 years ago, especially in terms of digital literacy, media literacy has been around for a good while now in the education.
And I know that you also do public service announcements, and I've used the French ones extensively, which helps me a lot. I'm not really a French speaker, but I've had to work with youth who are French. I'm going to come back here. I think this idea of creating a conversation is partly what we're doing here today. I'm going to ask if again, go back to our audience and see if you'd like to comment. Anybody interested in making a comment in the audience? How do you feel, how do we enlarge this conversation? We've all drunk the same water here. So how do we move this conversation into some of those places where it's a difficult and challenging conversation? Anybody want to jump in on that one? It's easy when you have like-minded people. How do you work with people who aren't on the same page? What's your approach? Yeah.
So someone made a comment to me recently. They were interested in having life skills like meditation, etc., taught in schools. And I said, oh, that's awesome. Have you ever thought about trying to personally influence that? Because I'm all about, if you have a change you want to see in the world, how can you personally make that change? Because if everyone sits back and says, oh, I wish this happened, but doesn't do anything towards it, then nothing's going to change. Anyway, so he said, well, schools are really regulatory, so I don't know how I could make a change. And then I thought about the maker movement and proposed to him that if you make a model outside of school, and then schools and parents start to see it and like it, and their kids are involved, then often it can make its way into schools. And that's exactly what we've seen happen in Toronto. We started our programs, and then schools and libraries started reaching out. We trained the Toronto Public Library and helped them implement maker spaces at their library. As well, we have programs at schools, and now schools are offering their own versions of programs of some that we do, which kind of are acting like as a feeder. The kids get interested there and then come to us. So I would say if you're trying to make a change with a big institution or body that doesn't seem ready, like we initially had approached schools and they weren't sure, but then once they saw the success of our model, they wanted to get involved. So my advice would be to create a model and be successful with it, and then institutions will want to adopt it.
So I'm going to bring us to a close a little bit with some closing remarks. And maybe it is about this notion of a conversation. How are we all going to carry this conversation forward out of this space into other aspects of what we do? So maybe I'll just start at the end and everybody has a chance to speak. You don't have to speak if you don't want to. But.
How are we going to take this conversation out there? I mean, yeah, it's just talking about it with people, and especially like I mentioned, as educators, being good examples of exactly what we're talking about here, and being good role models for our students, and that's about it, I guess.
I think that a focus on kids is a really good idea. Childhood is such a formative stage. It's kind of like a golf swing where if you make a small millimeter change at the outset of your swing, it can vastly impact the trajectory of your shot. So that's why we're focused on kids, and I encourage other people to recognize that if you want to change a generation, it's good to start with young people who are very malleable and still forming their ideas about the world, as opposed to people who, may already be fairly set in their ways and more difficult to make a change with.
I also deliver childhood is the greatest place to start, because that's when you're learning and everything. For me personally, I had no idea what technology and coding was until I was introduced by a teacher. And as soon as I learned about it and knew what I could do with it, I became more passionate. And while growing up, the classes I took, as soon as I got to high school, I took technology as one of my first options. And in that class, for like half a month, I was the only girl in that class, which kind of lowered my self-esteem. But yeah, I still stayed in that class. I didn't drop out. Another girl came, so it was only 2 girls. And now that I'm doing a computer engineering course, there's only 5 girls. And my teacher was just today, he was mentioning how surprisingly there are a lot of girls here compared to how it used to be. And that's why I would say like childhood is a good place to start. As this group I'm in, Don't Cut the Code, we're empowering kids at a young age to get involved, to learn and see what they can do. But if you actually teach them what they can do and what they can create and how they can make an impact, it's more leaning. Because if someone told me to make a website and not really what I could do, like for example, I have a friend who loves One Direction. She was engaged just because she found out that she could make a website for One Direction, and how she can do many things with it, not only make a website. So childhood is a really great place to start.
I think what I take from our conversation today is the importance of critical thinking for youngsters and for millennials too, especially when it comes to media education. So hopefully I can spread that awareness.
There's a term, critical literacy, which I think is taking the reading of print text and applying that to digital text and media text. And that's taught in lots of schools. But I'll turn it back to you.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say on the note of continuing this conversation, I think social media. One of the tools that we all have to continue these kinds of conversations is social media. Twitter and Facebook, they've become places where you can speak your thoughts and start a conversation. And on Twitter, you will see, just like he was saying about Trump, and Trump ideas will come out, and people are like, that must be true because he said it. And then there's this entire other conversation that's happening on Twitter where people are educated, and they're like, this isn't true. This is, what's really going on. Let's have a conversation about that. And so, so on the side at Camp Tech, I also teach this, online presence workshop with the Toronto Youth Job Corps. And so they often struggle with, and it's not something that they openly admit, but it's just an observation I made. They have this circle of friends, and it's like a norm of what they do and don't talk about. And then they have thoughts, but they don't necessarily put their thoughts out there in fear of how their thoughts are going to be received. And I think social media is a great tool to be a little bit courageous and say something that maybe you're scared to say. And be more vulnerable. It's really hard to be vulnerable on social media, and I think we have these tools where we have the opportunity to start these conversations or keep these conversations going. So just tweeting about, hey, I did this thing tonight. What do you think? Like, let's talk about it. Something simple like that.
Sure. And you know, we are in a space that is broadcasting this. We recently taped and it's being broadcast. So that's obviously the way in which the conversation will also be able to carry forward. But I'll go back to you. And you've been involved in this conversation a long time on a national and now beyond that kind of level. How do you move that conversation forward in terms of what your organization does?
So yes, getting those conversations going is a big part of our mission, and we are essentially all talking about the same conversation, but at different levels. So yes, at the national level, you know, it would be great to see some sort of national strategy in terms of digital education and 21st century skills, and that is happening. Part of the challenge in Canada is obviously that each province takes care of its own education system, so then it's trying to get also all the provinces and specifically the education ministries of every province to share and collaborate and try to have some sort of common vision. And so we've tried to lay the groundwork for this with our digital literacy framework, but at the same time, you know, you need very local conversations. I love the example of using social media and Facebook and empowering youth, but really anyone, to have those conversations within their own groups. And then in terms of teachers and parents, well, part of what we do is to try to remove any kind of resistance or fear to having these conversations by creating those resources, having done the research and saying, well, here you go, here's a guide or a lesson plan you can use and on this particular topic and bring it into your classroom or at home. But ultimately what it comes down to is for those conversations about the broader skills and competencies and ideas of media and digital literacy to be part of daily conversation, to start early with children, and to have them very regularly.
Thanks. You know, it's interesting for me as an educator in a big institution. They are very good at resisting new ideas, and you also have lots of teachers who say, "Well, I don't know how to teach the media." So anytime that there are resources available or agencies that do these kinds of things, it's really helpful for teachers. And it's the other part of this with the young. When they come into your classroom and they have a kind of desire and interest and need, they force lots of teachers to become media literate. You know, you have to work with these youth and you need to learn, you need to do things. And that pressure, the more organizations that are working with younger kids, I think, is really helping to keep the conversation about media literacy alive in schools. It comes and it goes and it wanes, and it's partly because there's a considerable pushback on the parts of teachers, to be honest with you. And also this notion that somehow it's not legitimate for study, you know, it's not history, it's not those kinds of things. But when the students put pressure on, or you can fold those things into other things, I think it really moves us forward in terms of that. I'm, you know, on the board of Regent Park Focus for a very good reason. It's been a useful tool, if you want to call it that, and a place that youth can go. There are youth from all across Toronto who are involved in this program here. So I'm going to ask Adonis to make a kind of final comment about this notion of this conversation. You're obviously involved in carrying it forward, but how do you move it forward in terms of this organization?
Well, I think.
Stand up. Sorry.
I think one thing is just realizing that we're not alone, that Regent Park Focus is a partner with other groups and other organizations, and I'm really glad to see some new partnerships that can happen and carry on this discussion. So that's one thing, and the other thing is being connected to other networks like Cactus, community, what's the rest of them?
access.
access for
Television.
community television
Users.
users. Yes, so it's quite a, so they're doing some great work as well. And so on the local level, being connected to groups that are doing national level and really working together more to carry those conversations not only in our community but across their networks. And also working with schools. I think, again, the work that we do is really important on the local level, and then it should be more connected with schools. So we're looking forward to playing more of a role with some of the schools in the area. And so that's another place that we want to go. Karen, if you want to say.
Hi, my name is Carrie. I'm with Regent Park Focus, Youth Media Arts Center, Partnership Development. I just wanted to make a quick comment because this was an amazing panel. And some of the themes that emerged, especially this highlighting of the word community, I just wanted to end on an inspiring note, I guess, because given the title being, what is the role of media literacy and education in the era of the selfie, hearing this word community used over and over again, seeing these amazing panelists and everything that they're offering to their communities and Toronto and Canada in general, and the world, I have to say I'm a little less worried about a future generation of egomaniacs in the era of the selfie. So thank you.
All right, and on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. This is a very enjoyable experience for me. I have a school council coming out. Parents are always asking questions. I now have several more organizations that I can point to, and I would hope that we would be able to, at a later date, continue to talk about these issues and address these issues. So thanks very much. I think the gig at 7 o'clock, so I gotta jet.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.